All right, everybody, welcome into episode 224 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. What if everything we believed about leadership was only half the story? My guest today challenges traditional views of leadership as a solo act and introduces us to the essential and often overlooked partner in the process, the follower. From a 28-year career in law enforcement to doctoral research and authorship, Dr. Chris Fuzie brings a unique perspective to what it means to lead, to follow, and to operate in the in-between space where both happen at once. This is a really thought-provoking episode that you don't want to miss, so let's get right to it with Dr. Chris Fuzie. All right, friends, welcome back into the Leaning into Leadership podcast. My guest on today's show is Dr. Chris Fuzie. I'm really intrigued by this conversation because as those of you who are regular listeners and watchers of the program, those of you who watch us over on YouTube, thank you for that. A lot of our recent guests have been in that education space. And while Dr. Fuzie certainly has some feet in the education space, he actually comes to us with a much different background. And we're going to talk a lot today about behavior-based leadership. We're going to talk about leading. We're going to talk about following, and we'll see where else we might go. But before we get to all of that, Dr. Chris Fuzie, welcome into Leaning into Leadership.
Well, thank you, Darrin. I appreciate being here. So this is going to be fun.
Absolutely. We've had an interesting journey to get us to this place where you and I finally get to sit down and record. Folks, I'll tell you that Chris and I have been in communication for probably 9 or 10 months about getting this podcast together, and a variety of things in each of our personal lives led to a number of cancellations, and finally we're sitting down and recording together. So this is going to be great. And Chris, let's do this first. Let's kind of maybe zoom out a little bit, jump up on the balcony, let people maybe kind of see some of Chris Fuzie's journey that has led you to where you are and what you do now. So go back as far as you'd like and just maybe share a little bit of your background and who you are and what you're really all about.
Okay. Well, I won't start with I was born as a baby. That's a little too far. So I'll start with what actually...
appreciate that.
Right. I'll start with what actually gets things interesting is that being in the police department for about 28 years, Modesto PD, and starting it as one of the most dangerous positions, the parking enforcement officer, in a downtown area. And I started with doing that, and then I worked my way up through the ranks to patrol, field training officer, sergeant, lieutenant, and I was in charge of different units like the traffic unit, the training unit, the school resource officer, school police officer unit, hostage negotiation team, and then homicide, gangs, street level drug team. So a very interesting career, and that's spanned 28, 29 years. Halfway through that is where the education part, and that's where it gets interesting, is that I never really considered doing anything but police work. I mean, it was fun. I was enjoying it, and so about halfway through, I kept seeing all my friends getting hurt. I was like, wait a minute, what am I going to do if I get hurt? I got to have a backup plan. Good cop has a backup plan. So I got to have a backup plan. So I said, well, let me go back to school. So I went back to school, and I can't get a degree in criminal justice because I'm in it. So I said, okay, how about something else? So org leadership. I found a bachelor's degree in org leadership. So I finished I like to say I just had a PhD before going back to school, but that's a public high school diploma. That didn't really help me too much. You can be very successful as a cop, but it doesn't help you get any other kind of job. So I went back to school for this org leadership stuff and finished the bachelor program. And while I was doing the bachelor program, I started taking some of those leadership concepts, the theories that we're learning in the classroom, and seeing how they play out in this little petri dish of a police department that I was in. And I say little, but 400 employees. So you have a lot of dynamics going on. And I was starting to see how these leadership, scientific leadership theories actually worked. And so after doing that, I graduated with the bachelor's. And then I was like, well, they offered me to go to the master's program. I said, oh, okay, I'll do the master's program too. So I went to the master's program. In the meantime, I was promoted to sergeant and then to lieutenant. And, throughout all the stuff that happens as a cop, I'm doing this education thing and applying some of these concepts to what happened in the police world. So, and then I retired. I graduated from that. I retired in 2010, and I started my own company, my own leadership training company. I should say before that, while I was with the police department, I started training with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and then flying all over the country and training police departments in leadership, and then especially throughout California. And then I started working in California, doing our training here for California Peace Officer Standards and Training. I did a leadership class. I was helping with the supervisory classes, training the new supervisors in California. And then while I was doing that, I found this doctoral program, again, in organizational leadership. So it's like, I got to do that. I mean, it was calling me. And so I went and did the doctorate in organizational leadership, and that got me to thinking about a lot of the things that happen. And even though I've been training in leadership and followership, I really never really concerned myself with followership until about probably 6 or 7 years ago now. And that followership is, it's the whole leadership. I used to think of leadership, and I think we all still do this, think of leadership as a person, as character traits, as a position, as something like that. But it's actually more of a process than anything else, involving the leader, the follower, and whatever the context is. And so I started focusing on that, and that's when I started writing the books all about behavior, because everything you learn as a police officer is about behavior. And if you think about it, anytime you do something, it's behavior. And whether you're doing it as a leader or you're doing it as a follower, it's behavior. So that's kind of where I got to today, and that's what, the huge overview. And I probably gave you too much, but that's where we're at.
Okay. No, not at all. I really appreciate that. And there's a few things there that maybe I'd like to dig into a little bit more. But I think I really just want to go right at what you just talked about and have you maybe expand for us.
Okay.
On that concept of leadership, followership, and how leadership truly is more than just simply having a certain set of traits, having a title, that type of thing. I just want you to build on.
So the mental schema that we've learned, or that we've been given, I should say, or that's been the major schema that we have, is that leaders and followers are separate. Leaders and followers are opposite. You ask, and I actually did this with ChatGPT. I said, hey, what does it mean to be opposite? It told me what it means to be opposite. I said, so what is the opposite of a leader? And it said follower. So then I asked it the question, well, if this means opposite, and you're saying leader or follower is the opposite of leader, but they go the same direction, they're trying to achieve the same goals, and I thought I broke it because it stopped for a second. And when it stopped, it stopped, and then it said, thank you for the clarification. In this context, followership is not the opposite of leadership. Followership is actually complementary, and that's right. That discussion is right in that book. I just took it word for word, copy paste right in the book, But that's the thing. A lot of us still think of those things as being separate and being certain traits. One of the things I did throughout my 10 plus years, actually more than that, of consulting, is every time we would do a class, I would ask people 4 questions. Who is the greatest leader in all of human history? And we'd go over all sorts of things. Who is your favorite leader that you've actually interacted, and why? So they would explain that. And then I did the easy question, who is your worst leader and why? And then they would talk about that. And then I'd ask the last question is, give me 2 traits or behaviors of great leadership. And, like every good consultant, you write those on a board, or you write those on a sticky note, plaster it all over. And then later on, we're talking about followership, and I went back to that list. I said, okay, this is the list that this class made of great leadership traits, great leadership behaviors. How many of these things do you not want in your followers? And when you think about those behaviors and the behavior-based way of doing things, everybody said, no, we want all of those. Even risk taker. They want people to be risk takers. They want, and so what I found over these 10 years, I would save these lists. And I didn't save the whole big board, but I'd save the list, and then I boiled them down to 86 different behaviors of great leaders and exemplary followers. And that's also in the book. And so you think about this leading and following, and then there was one of the parts about leadership is that we talk about it as just behaviors, but it's actually more of a process. You can't have leadership. So you have the three factors: leaders, followers, and a context. Imagine how many leaders were born who never had a context or never had followers. Right? Imagine how many followers were born, never had good leader, or never had leaders, never had a context. Or leaders and followers get together, but they don't have anything to do. There's no problems to solve. There's no, right? So you have to have all three to have good leadership and followership, and the context and the situation to deal with. So it's more of a process. You take one of those things out, you don't have it anymore. So when you think about leadership, to me, and then when you think about the leaders and followers, if they're actually not opposites and they're working towards the same goal, then it's more about the behavior, the do part. It's more about the behavior than anything else. So that's why I focus on the behavior-based leadership, plus the 86 behaviors that I boiled down from 10 years of consulting work that says this is what good leaders have or do or are. And then you can pick out of that list, and you can have more than 86. You can have 100, 200, 10,000. I don't care. But you pick those behaviors out of that you want in your organization. But keep in mind that this isn't just for benevolent purposes. Gangs do the same thing. Criminal street gangs do the same thing. Criminals, organizations, mafias, whatever, they do the same thing because the concepts work. Just that they have a different purpose than, what we might desire, right? So that's kind of what I think of that leadership stuff and why behavior is so important.
I find that extremely fascinating. And obviously, like somebody who works a lot in leadership, consult, coach, support, that type of thing, understanding context, followers, leaders. But I had not thought really about followership in that same way. And I'm curious, when you let's maybe even go back to like during your law enforcement career, when you were in those leadership roles and you were some of this work was coming out of the courses you were taking and then that type of thing. What were some of the things that you started to notice, or that maybe you notice now in the work that you do, that leaders and followers do that gets in the way of this type of great leadership and followership?
So I just recently, I'd say in the last 5 years, realized how much we did both leading and following throughout my entire police career. From the time you're in the academy, they teach you to either you're either the contact officer or you're the backup officer or the cover, whatever you call it. So if you're the contact, then you're in the lead for what happens with that situation. If you're the cover, you're more of the follower, and your job is different, but yet it's still to find a successful solution to that kind of call. I didn't really even realize that till maybe 5 years ago, that the whole career was that thing. And then to answer your question about what gets in the way, I think the idea that the leader has to do certain things, the follower has to do certain things. The idea of liminal space is that you may have to lead and follow at the same time. And so that's when the behavior becomes most important. And we tend to get away from that. Well, I'm the leader. I can't, I kind of freak people out here when I started working here. I work at a district attorney's office now. I'm the business manager. So I'm number 3 in command of 160 some odd people, $32 million budget. But I have to follow what our district attorney says. I report directly to him. If he says this is the way we're going to go, I say, okay, this is the way we're going. I have to turn around and get 160 other people to follow, right? But I'm following, but I'm also leading all at the same time. And I think that what happens is a lot of people think, well, I'm in charge, I can't do it. So what freaked people out was, we'd have light bulbs go out in this building, and you put in a request for the light bulb, and it would take a month for somebody to, get to fixing the light bulb. And I thought, well, how long do we need to stay in the dark, really? I mean, and then it's almost metaphorical about, how long are you going to wait for somebody else to turn the lights on for you. And so I just went and I got a ladder and I got the light bulbs. I found where they were. And I got a ladder and I went up and I started changing light bulbs. And they're looking at me like, why are you changing light bulbs? And as a matter of fact, this is a different district attorney. We have a new one now. But the one that hired me, she goes, why are you up changing light bulbs? I said, well, because I don't want to sit here and wait for a month and a half for GSA to come change the light bulbs. And they're very much, I got to tell you, they're very much more responsive now. They do a great job. But that's the political side there. So I told her, I said, well, I just want to get it done. And she says, well, you're the business manager. I go, yeah, that's okay. I know how to change light bulbs. I do it in my own house. So, and she goes, well, okay, well, what if you fall off the ladder? I said, well, Berger, here's the thing. If I fall off the ladder, you should fire me for being incompetent. But it's that kind of thing. People are afraid. My position, I shouldn't do this or I shouldn't do that. I'm the leader. I showed up as a lieutenant one day to an accident. I was first on scene at this accident. It's just kind of your average accident, maybe some minor injuries, nothing CPR or squirting blood anywhere or anything like that. So I started taking down the accident report, moved the cars out of the street, started taking the accident report. And one of the cops shows up and he goes, hey, what are you doing? I said, well, I got this. I'll just finish the accident report. And he goes, you can't do that. I said, well, I can because I've already got the information, or we just have to do it all over again because, he goes, well, but you're the lieutenant. I go, yeah, but I was also a motor cop, so I know how to do one of these, Well, okay. I said, what's wrong? He goes, well, lieutenants don't do that. Yeah, they do. They should. And that's the kind of thing. That's why I say we get in our own way sometimes, just focusing on our position and what that position should be. Whereas if something needs to get done, like as a solopreneur or an entrepreneur, you have to be the CEO and the garbage taker outer. Yeah. That's the fact, right? You do it all. So it shouldn't be any different in other organizations, even in the Army. And I've heard some Army and military people say, it doesn't matter what your rank is. As a matter of fact, this is in my book. It doesn't matter what your rank is. The mission is the most important. And one of the examples I have in the book is from a helicopter crewman who's in the back of the thing. He's what is he? He's like an E5, right? He's enlisted. He's like an E5. And then you have two officers in the front flying the chopper. Well, the person in the back he's enlisted, i.e. a follower. The two in the front are officers, i.e. leaders. But that person in the back is the one with the situational awareness for what's going on with the mission, and they're the ones telling the pilots, go left, go right, go up, go down, whatever they need to do in order to accomplish the mission, depending on what it is. And I said, well, how is that taken? He goes, it doesn't matter. He says, if I'm the one with situational awareness, I'm the one that has to tell them what to do, otherwise the mission fails. So whether if I fail, we all fail. And then, if the pilots fail, then we crash, we all fail. And that kind of thinking is what we should get to and focus more on the behavior than on the positional requirements or status, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
A couple of things that come to mind there. I was a high school principal for a long time, and there were many a times where there was a spill in the hallway, and I could get on the radio and call a custodian, or the janitor closet was right around the corner. I can just go grab a mop. I know how to run a mop, right? I've been on the business end of a mop a lot when I was the building principal, and I know sometimes people would say, why are you doing that? That's not your role, and it's like, right? Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and that's the thing, yeah. But you're brave to be a high school principal, in my opinion. I'll go work with bad guys. You're brave to be a high school principal.
Love that job so very much. So I want you to go a little bit further. You said it, and I know you were talking about it, but I'd like you to just go a little bit further with a little bit more definition around the liminal space, because listeners, I'm sure, caught you, they heard you say it, but we didn't really go super deep. And I know your most recent book is titled Liminal Space. And so I want to give you that opportunity to go a little bit further with that specific definition.
Yeah, so the book is Liminal Space, and the subtitle is Reshaping Leadership and Followership. So there's two different concepts going on here. So the first is the liminal space. And if you look at biology or the sciences, when something is in a liminal space, it's in transition. It's like a caterpillar transitioning to a butterfly, right? And when it's in the cocoon, it's in that liminal space and it's transitioning. Well, if you think about most leaders, most mid-manager, even elected officials, they have to follow somebody. They follow somebody. The elected officials follow the populace. And so we talk about any mid-manager where they have to lead and follow at the same time. They're transitioning all the time. Whether they're leading or following, they're still in that same position. And so they still have to deal with that context. And so, like I just said before, my position where I follow the DA, but then I have to turn around and get 160 some odd people to do what we need done, that's a liminal space. That's where I'm leading and following simultaneously, and I'm doing the behavior that is required to get the job done. And so that's where when you talk about liminal space, it's less about the position and more about the behavior. That's where the second part of the book comes in, is reshaping behavior. And use tessellations of behavior. Similar, I take the concept out of math, which I learned in 10th grade in high school, and you talk about tessellations where you can cover the surface of a plane with geometric shapes, right? And they're all around us in nature and everything. Well, if we can create behaviors that we can repeat those behaviors over and over again to cover an entire organization, teamwork, cohesion, honesty, the ability to learn, any of those kind of behaviors, that's where we can reshape leadership and followership. Because you can lead and follow in that liminal space, and all you have to do is those behaviors that the organization requires. But the liminal space itself is kind of interesting to think about, because we all do it naturally, but when you break it down into, am I leading right now or am I following, or am I doing both simultaneously? The liminal space, in my use of it, is that we do it simultaneously sometimes without even thinking about it. I hope that helps. I know I may have confused people.
No, not at all. I think that's fantastic. I think that's a really, really clear and concise definition of that. I mean, and I appreciate the examples in there too, because I think probably all of us, especially after listening to that, can say, okay, yeah, I know exactly what Chris is talking about, because I have found myself in that. I mean, as I was listening to you talk, I found myself thinking about, as a superintendent, how I had to follow a board. As a high school principal, I had to follow multiple, layers above me, superintendent, district level board, all of those types of things, and how, yet at the same time, then you have to, turn and lead the people that, that ultimately, whether they're direct report or they're part of the organization that you're charged with leading. I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate the information. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that we also think about is, like you're talking about being the superintendent and the principal, we sometimes tend to think about just leadership in those kind of positions. Take a McDonald's worker who was hired 4 months ago, and they've learned how to make fries, and they've learned how to make shakes, and they've learned how to make the burgers and everything. Well, then they hire another person today, and they're given to this 4-month experienced McDonald's worker. And I'm just using McDonald's. I mean, we could use any hamburger place or any fast food place, where now that person is in a leadership position because they have to train the new person. And that one-on-one training. And now they're a liminal leader because they're in that liminal space. They're also a liminal follower because they have to follow what their manager or the person who was hired 8 months ago says, right? And so everybody gets put in that. And we do it so naturally that we don't even think about it. We just anticipate that it's up in these lofty kind of jobs, superintendent, that's pretty high up there, I mean, wow. But that's what we think about when we think about leadership. We don't think about, the person who's training somebody else how to make the fries. The person who's teaching the other person how to, was telling my son this last week. I said, hey, I was watching him mop a floor, and he's in the Navy. And I said, you need some help with that? He goes, no, I've swabbed quite a few decks, Dad. And I go, no, you're an airman. You haven't swabbed nothing. I said, wait, before you do this anymore, let me show you the right way to wring out your mop before. And so I showed him. You put it in, you twist it. I said, this only comes from years as a janitor. I know how to do this, right? And that I learned how to do that. It's one of the second jobs I had as a cop, is being a janitor. And you learn how to do that. You spin the mop and then squish it out. It's much better. And he goes, oh, wow, that's that kind of, whether you're a custodian, whether you're whatever it is, teaching somebody how to do the fries, you teach them those techniques. You are a leader. You're a liminal leader. You're taking care of that business, and it doesn't have to be these lofty kind of positions. Almost everybody is a liminal leader in some way.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome concept. I love that so much. And, there are a lot of times where I get the opportunity to work with, with school districts and with leadership teams in all facets and that type of thing. And a lot of times I'm asked to lean into specifically that, where everybody is a leader, and to share some of that. And certainly you've certainly helped sharpen the sword for me today with that liminal space. I can't thank you enough for that. And as I'm not overly surprised, our time has absolutely flown by in this conversation. So
sorry about that.
I'm gonna. Oh no, that's great. I think it's wonderful. But I'm gonna transition us to the last question that I ask everybody here on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. You've shared so much, but I'm curious, what might be something, Chris, that you're doing to lean into leadership right now?
So it is the followership stuff. The followership is kind of exploding in leadership, because we've kind of beaten leadership into submission now. And so now what's the next step? Well, people are starting to realize that it isn't the same. And leadership, the practice and concepts of leadership are evolving. And they're evolving to where they're saying, hey, let's look at followership, because it's not opposite. It's not just a focus on the leader. We have to think about the followers. And so that's what I'm looking at. That's kind of what my focus is. Even next week, I'll be going to the Global Followership Conference. This is starting to become a big deal. Wow. This will be our fourth year with the Global Followership Conference. And people from all over the world are going, hey, wait a minute. That's right. This followership stuff is huge. So that's where I'm headed.
Yeah, that's outstanding stuff, man. I love that. And I'm going to have to check that out. I did not realize there was a global followership conference. I definitely have to look into that. So
yeah,
man, this was awesome. I'm so glad we finally got a chance to sit down and have this conversation and do it with the recording actually going. People are going to want to check out your books. They're going to want to learn more about you. How do they get in touch with you? How do they grab a copy of the book?
So the books, all of my books are on Amazon. Score Performance Counseling has its own website, which is www.scoreperformancecounseling.com. You can get a hold of me by going to my website, cmfleadership.com, and then there's a contact page. Or my email is just chris@cmfleadership.com. I just have to remember who I am and where I work. So
there you go.
Yeah. So that's the way to do it.
Okay, perfect. We'll put all that stuff in the show notes so people can check that out. Man, this was awesome. Dr. Chris Fuzie, thank you so much for joining me here on Leaning Into Leadership.
Thank you, Darrin. I'm glad we finally got this
Standing
together.
episode there. I appreciate Dr. Fuzie joining me here on the podcast. And now it is time for a pep talk. Today on the pep talk, I just want to reference something that earlier in the week, one of my clients said to me. We were talking about one of his work partners, somebody that is a part of the leadership team that he is a part of. And he mentioned how he had told them, sometimes you just got to turn on your blinker and merge into your lane. What he meant by that was specifically that individual had been kind of holding back, not moving forward, not taking the reins in the leadership role that they had. I would challenge you this week to think about that. Are you hesitating to merge? Are you really fully getting into your lane and stepping on the gas as a leader? Or are you sitting back and being hesitant? My advice, turn on that turn signal, merge into your lane, and get traveling down the road to awesome. Thanks so much for joining me this week on the podcast, folks. Get out there, have a road to awesome week. What the